Hello again out there in video game land. Welcome to the 4th edition of the 240p Club podcast. Today, what are we talking about?
You're talking about remakes.
Yes. Hi, welcome to the inaugural edition of the 240p Club. We're remaking it.
Yeah.
No, we're not. I'm only kidding.
We're really not.
I'm only
Nobody
kidding.
wants
This is
to
the
hear that.
4th edition. We're not remaking something 3 weeks after it came out.
Save that for episode 100.
Yeah, we'll save it for episode 100.
Are we gonna make it that far?
Well, we talked about we're going to make it to $9.99.
Alright, that works.
So, yeah.
Which means I have to put up with you for that many episodes?
I
Jeez.
know, what a
24
tragedy.
years.
Oh,
20
jeez.
years.
I mean,
Oh,
I've already
man.
known you for like 10, so like...
yeah.
Hey, we're halfway there.
Alright. We're going to be in the nursing home talking about some of these games. Remember back in my day,
Back in my day, we
had 2 controllers, and they only had 4 buttons.
We didn't have
and
any
my
of this.
games only required 1.
And we didn't know what 3D was. You wanted 3D, we wore those funky glasses.
I think at that point they'd be up to like 5D. Well, maybe.
Probably.
Maybe.
Probably you just wear something on your head and stand on like a treadmill or something, and bam, you're in the game.
Yo, you know how cool that would be?
We shall.
I would have an excuse to buy a treadmill now.
There we go.
Oh, you're
Please
talking
buy
about
me
the
a treadmill.
Virtual Boy.
Oh.
Screw the Virtual Boy. Unfortunately, it cost the career and some say the life of Gunpei Yokoi, who created Metroid, as we all know, and was one of Nintendo's most well-known innovators. That's a story for a completely different podcast.
I remember they had a display of the Virtual Boy at Sears like a long time ago, and I remember like everyone was playing like all the demos around the game, like the game area. Everyone was playing the 64, or they were playing the Sega, or whatever they had available. The Virtual Boy was completely empty, so I said, why is this empty? Let me find out what it's like. I put my face in there and I said, what in God's name is this?
It was an early attempt at 3D in the 90s. The only problem was it had 2 colors, infrared and black. So every game was just in red and black, and it used to mess with your eyesight so
Oh my
bad.
God. Even with the 3DS now that's out, I don't put the 3D function on. It just...
Yeah,
It
it might
bothers
make
me
you
too
sick.
much.
Here we go. That's the thing with like games like that. Like we'll never see a remake of some of those titles. Although we did see the tennis game wind up in Wii Sports. So I mean, like there's always that. But modern game companies now, including designers for Ubisoft, EA, all them. They grew up in the Nintendo era and the Super Nintendo era. They played all these classic games as kids, and then, growing up, they figured, what would be cool if this game is in 3D or whatever, or, we made it in, like, the, third dimensions, like, have unlockable stuff, etc., and pitched some of these ideas to some of the biggest game corporations out there. So, hence, we got a bunch of remakes over the years of classic games. Now, you just told me there was a Strider remake I didn't know about. Mm-hmm. That came out last year, was it?
I believe it came out last year. It was downloadable only for the PS3. I think it did fairly well. People were really excited about Strider, and also because it was one of like the older NES games. What happened with the I believe this was in around 1998, I believe, when they first started pitching the idea of Marvel vs. Capcom. Now there were a couple other Marvel Capcom fighting games. It was Marvel Superheroes, Street Fighter X and X-Men. But
X-Men Children of the Atom.
X-Men Children of the Atom, yes. But Marvel vs. Capcom was like the big main one, which added a couple characters from some lost, forgotten franchises that people probably didn't remember. And Strider was one of the characters, so...
It kind of piqued his interest again.
Mm-hmm. It brought up the interest again. And then, like I said, around last year, maybe even the year before that, they remade Strider as a downloadable-only game for the PS3.
Here's the thing with Strider, actually. They remade it well early into its existence. I believe it came out in '89 for the Nintendo, and once the Sega Genesis launched, they decided to remake it in, I believe it was 1990. It was basically, it wasn't a direct port, it was a completely different version, but I think it was more closer to the arcade version than it was the Nintendo version. But yeah, no, remakes have been happening for years. I mean, not just like porting it to a different system. Even well back in the day, you had Double Dragon for the arcades, and a fairly different version came out for the NES just because of the hardware limitations of the system. So, remakes have been going on for quite some time. That's a little different, though. That's porting a title over to home from the arcade. They have a license that has been well ported into homes for years. That you forget about the license for a while, and then you realize, hey, we own the rights to this license. Why don't we make an entirely new game? They just recently did that with Doom. Mm-hmm. There's a brand new Doom game out. It came out this year.
This is the second time they remade Doom, because Doom 3 is pretty much just a remake of the first Doom with actual plot.
Yeah, well, the first Doom had a plot. I mean, it was
all in the manual, though.
Yeah, manual, and you can find it online. But obviously, there's no plot for deathmatch. It's just, you have a bunch of players, you have this map, and then bam, you have a deathmatch. But yeah, they're remaking games. The most classic example, I believe, that kind of resurrected a franchise was Ninja Gaiden.
Oh boy, Ninja Gaiden.
Of course, that originally came out for the first version of the Xbox back in like 2003 or something. Yeah. And it was popular enough to spin off into a whole trilogy of games.
So there were 3 remade Ninja Gaiden games. I heard they were difficult. I think I only played the first one.
The difficulty curve definitely changed, and now that they actually have a new director for Ninja Gaiden 3, it really wasn't all that great. People had played it and they said it was just bad. What they did was they did like an expansion version of it called, I really can't remember the name of it, Razor's Edge, I believe it was. That added a few more characters to it, added a little more to the story, and they said it was okay. It was even better than 3, which really isn't all that difficult.
The NES version was well known for its difficulty. Well documented for its just frustration level. And it was for entirely different reasons. Like, you had to make some spectacular jumps in the Xbox version of Ninja Gaiden. However, the Nintendo version with the respawns and everything, it's like you had to basically just be an ironclad gamer, and there's no way you were finishing this game without dying at least once.
And don't even get me started on level 6.
Yeah, level 6 is probably one of the most ridiculously difficult levels of all time in Nintendo history.
And all just for one reason: if you die at any point to the final boss, you go all the way back to the beginning of the stage.
Yeah, which the stage 6-1 is frustrating, 6-2 is ridiculous, and I believe 6-3 was just god-awful ridiculous.
It made it to the point where you just didn't want to play anymore.
Yeah, I've lost a controller or two in my day to the original Ninja Gaiden.
I've only just beaten it within the past year myself.
Yeah, basically with the advent of save states now from emulators, we're not saying download the game emulators, sorry game companies. However, if you just so happen to come across an emulated version where you can save your state, it makes it a little easier, but...
Cheaters!
Yeah, I consider that cheating.
Yeah, I've actually beat mine on the real system.
Do it the hard way, like us.
Yeah, I've beaten Ninja Gaiden too. It took a couple hours, which is non-stop frustration. But one was a title that always eluded me, just because once you get far enough, it just frustrates you to the point where you just don't want to play anymore. Another remake they made, actually, that was pretty good, was Bionic Commando. It was a cult following on the NES. It was re-released a couple times. They actually remastered the storyline because, Nintendo censorship back in the day didn't want a whole bunch of Nazis and everything, Nazi imagery in the game, even if you're basically just going in to kill a bunch of Nazis. So they remade it to some unknown empire, etc., etc. But you could really tell what they were, because the enemy soldiers were red, and it was basically a sequel to Commando, the original arcade/NES title. It was basically like a Kairi Warriors. You soldier, scrolled upwards, just shooting Bionic Commando was more a side-scroller. Instead of jumping, they gave you a hook for an arm. I don't need to describe it for a lot of hardcore classic gamers. It was just a classic game. It was amazing. They finally remade it for PlayStation 3. I had it was a downloaded game. Like, you couldn't buy it in stores. It was just a download game. They basically remade the first one in a 3D image, but it was still kind of like a side-scroller. It was a really fun game. Some Swedish company made it under license from Capcom, and then they were touted with making a sequel to Bionic Commando, basically just called Bionic Commando for PlayStation 3. This was more you had to buy it in stores. The game was terrible. It flopped. It was a 3D first-person shooter at one point. It was basically a shithole. And it bankrupted the Swedish company that made this game, and Capcom basically, I believe they brought the license out of obscurity for a couple fighting games.
He was in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, which kind of boosted his popularity again.
They named him Lad, I think, because he was... that was his name from the NES game. I think it was mistranslated. You didn't really find out till the ending, anyway. So, yeah, that was a remake that just completely fell flat on its face. Of course, the 16-bit era was no stranger of remakes as well. We had Super Mario All-Stars, which was a port of all the titles from the NES, the Super Mario Bros. Series, plus the Lost Levels, which was the original version of Super Mario 2 in Japan.
Which was originally released for this system over there, and I guess because it was too hard, they didn't bother porting it to a cartridge or anything, and instead we got Doki Doki Panic, or at least a remake of it, released as Super Mario Bros. 2 here.
It was too hard and too similar, I think. That's why they didn't release it, because it was basically the same music and everything. So they decided not to release it here. They just remade a old manga from Japan called Doki Doki Panic. You also had, later on in the 16-bit era, the Wily Wars, which was the first 3 Mega Man games from the NES remade in 16-bit as well. They never released it here. I believe it was a mail-order cartridge for if you subscribe to the Sega Network, which in '95 was basically you hook up to a modem and you were able to play a couple titles every month for a $30 fee, I think, a month.
I believe you downloaded them to a special card or something, and after you were done playing it, it was going from the cart. A couple other games like Golden Axe 3, which also wasn't officially released here, but did make it onto this Sega Net thing.
Yeah, the thing was the Wily Wars. That was their big thing. It was basically, again, it was a remake in 16-bit versions of the first 3 Mega Man games. Although I do say that it was a little harder than the Mega Man versions for the NES. I think the controllers weren't as responsive.
They screwed up the run physics, so you could basically get everywhere faster by jumping instead of just walking.
Yeah, I noticed that. Also, in Mega Man 2, it was difficult to begin with, but that was even more difficult than the difficult version for NES. But anyway, remakes have been going on for a while. We just want to differentiate, though, between remakes and ports. If you have something Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, the NES version, it was basically, we'll consider it a port, although it was different. They added a couple levels, and it was completely different from the arcade game. The physics, it was a whole lot easier than the arcade game, let's definitely put it that way.
I believe Final Fight comes to mind as well. The arcade version had 3 different characters that you could play as: Cody, Guy, and Mike Hager. But when they ported it over to the SNES, because of the severe limitations, they had to take Guy out. And there was also a lot of censorship, there was a lot of character changes, but that's a topic for a different story.
And Nintendo is notorious for a lot of their censorship. We're talking about remakes and ports. There's definitely a difference. Remake is a completely different game. Ports were just, they ported stuff over, they just converted it from arcade version to NES or Super NES. Or
since we were talking about the Sega Net earlier, I think over in Japan they had something similar called the Satellaview for the Super NES, and they actually made a remake of Zelda 1 over there with voice acting and stuff.
Oh wow!
It's popularly known as BS Zelda. I haven't been able to get it to run on any emulator yet, but supposedly it's not a bad port.
Check it out. Was it 16-bit graphics or?
Yeah, 16-bit graphics.
That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, something to look for.
Most recently, someone programmed 3D versions of popular NES side-scrollers. I've seen online, like Mega Man 3 is one of them. I believe Super Mario Brothers. We'll talk about dead video game genres in a future episode, but the platform side-scroller definitely wasn't one of them. It kind of made a comeback with, because they're remaking these into 3D, and also the success of New Super Mario Brothers, which is basically rendered 3D graphics into a 2D side-scroller.
Of course, in the indie gaming scene on Steam, there's also a whole fuck ton of side-scrollers like Super Meat Boy, and just too many to list.
That's the thing in trends in video games. Like a lot of the big time game designers, big time companies are focusing on obviously 3D. The big thing's 3D shooters right now in sports games. The indie gamers a lot of them are designing throwback games, and they're basically all new adventures in like a 16-bit style. Also, I do want to mention there's two, for PlayStation 3 I downloaded them in the 8-bit style, Mega Man 9 and 10. They were, they weren't remakes of anything. They were two brand new games, but they were done completely in 8-bit style, and they were, while extremely difficult, they were awesome. The only thing is, though, I don't know if it's me with my PlayStation 3, but the controller lag was a little too much on 9. 10, it was more reasonable, I thought.
And certain companies have actually been sort of porting some of their old games onto, newer consoles with, completely updated graphics. I think the most famous is DuckTales Remastered.
Yeah, they also Rocket Knight Adventures did that too. That was just kind of an obscure game that it was an excellent obscure game.
I think it was a completely new game in that case. They also had I think Konami also did remakes of the first Castlevania, and I'm not sure which Ninja Turtles game. I think Turtles in Time.
Yeah, they did a reshelled Turtles in Time. I've played that actually. It's not bad. It's just basically the same game with 3D graphics. They also did Super Street Fighter 2, I should say. Mm-hmm. They remade those with updated HD graphics, in 1080.
I will admit, since I grew up with Street Fighter 2, I really do prefer those graphics over the HD. The HD just looks a little too... I really don't know exactly how to describe it. I think the cat over there described it better.
Yeah, my cat described it perfectly. If you heard that in the background, it was a little meow. And he's still meowing. He was more of a fan of 2D games, I think, because he was wide awake watching us play Mega Man 2. So, the other thing we wanted to talk about actually on our podcast today, archive.org, I believe, unearthed 144 old issues of Nintendo Power. You can download them off the internet and just read them on your favorite e-reader. Nintendo Power was awesome back in the day. Obviously it wasn't the most. It was kind of biased because obviously it was published by Nintendo, so they only covered Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and they never mentioned any of the other systems. However, back in the day, before the internet, before walkthroughs and everything, that was the best place to find a walkthrough for a game that you were struggling with. One of the newer games, just find an issue with Nintendo Power. If your buddies had an issue, whatever, you can figure out that really hard level.
I think I still have my Star Fox poster from a certain issue. It may have been the Star Fox issue, and it was actually an advertisement for Nintendo Power, but it had the phone number to subscribe and everything. But it was cool how they had the front cover of it, and they had all the characters together. It was just really cool looking.
Yeah, it had some cool artwork too. Mm-hmm. That's one of the benefits of being basically Nintendo's magazine. You didn't have to worry about licensing or anything.
Now tell me, do they have the fold-out posters, full versions of the fold-out posters?
I believe they do. If you don't find them in Archive, I believe they have them elsewhere. If you really want to print one up and then hang it up, I'm sure there's a way to do it. It
won't really be the same, though. It's just basically putting print screen paper on your
I had a friend actually that was taking a plane trip and decided he was just going to download 12, 13 issues or whatever and read this on his plane, including some of the early ones. Nintendo Power is an awesome magazine. I know if you do an internet search, you could probably find them for other video game magazines. Game Pro, one of them.
I believe Game Informer.
Yeah, all the Game Informers. Yeah, but you could probably still find some of the old issues somewhere. Yeah, no, video game magazines obviously went the way of the dinosaur. With the internet, you don't need to buy a magazine now when you can just download every bit of information possible off the internet. Or, you can have an e-magazine where you just go to their website and basically they publish new stuff every week.
When I used to work at GameStop, they, with the card, you would always get the Game Informer subscription with that.
I remember that.
And, yeah, I think I still have mine. I have mine for another month, but I'm not going to renew it.
Game Informer just seemed like they went a completely different direction. I'm looking at it, it just looks like massive artwork on the front.
It really
and it's just a collage of pictures to, basically get you to buy all these games.
And they had wanted us to tell our customers that we were only accepting e-transfers of Game Informer rather than giving you physical copies. But there were people coming to my front counter. I wonder, can I get a physical copy? My son likes to read it, or et cetera, et cetera. Because, a little kid's not really going to go on a computer and want to spend the time downloading and then just looking through, scrolling through. He's going to want to open the door, or open the book. He's going to want to look at all the pictures. He's going to say, Mommy, look, I want this game,
It was really trippy. I found a UK magazine back in the day, and they were merciless with some of their reviews.
This I have to read.
Yeah, they were quite interesting. I think it was from '94 or something. They were covering Mega Man X and Super Metroid and a couple other games. And I remember it was from '94 because actually they were talking about the World Cup here in the U.S. and they had they reviewed 4 or 5 soccer titles for various systems.
I believe Goal was one of them.
Yeah, and actually Mega Man Soccer
actually
was on
have Goal still on my Super Nintendo.
Nice.
That game was so difficult.
They actually reviewed Mega Man Soccer as well, which was just a piece of crap, which the worst password system I've ever seen in my life. If basically, how the Mega Man passwords are, it's a grid, you put a red dot inside certain spaces. Mega Man 2 was 9 different dots, you just had to fill in. Mega Man 3 was basically a freestyle password, I don't even know. But
eventually they introduced a second color of dot.
Yeah, it was blue. Mega Man Soccer, it was red, but the grid was 32 by 32 and featured 4 40 dots, something like that, in order to remember the code. Writing these was a pain in the ass, let me tell you. I figured out, you just dashes and dots in order to try to figure out the password, but oh my god, it was ridiculous. And the game wasn't that good to begin with, so it was
I guess they felt they needed to compensate with something.
Yeah, that game was just ridiculously bad. I don't even know who thought that was a good idea from Capcom. And this wasn't even in their era of dumb ideas. This was a dumb idea in the middle of Capcom's golden era. Mega Man X2 was coming out, and 7 wasn't that good, but at least it was a throwback to the original series. But they were releasing games like that. They were releasing Final Fight. They were releasing actually Captain Commando had a game, which was I guess a parody of Final Fight. This was on the Final Fight engine. All these games, Capcom was just top of the world at that point. And why did they release Mega Man Soccer? But anyway, video game magazines were covering that and covering all the other stuff.
And that's one reason why I'm really upset about Capcom's decline, because I grew up with this whole Capcom era. I played all the Capcom games, all the Street Fighters, all the Final Fights, anything in between, and now just seeing them become what they have, it's just...
We should mention Mighty Number 9, too, because it kind of fits into the story.
Oh, that poor game.
Nikki, you know more about it than I do.
Basically, there was a falling out between the original Mega Man creator. Names escape me.
Keiji Inafune.
Thank you, Keiji Inafune. Or, as some people say, Inafune Keiji. Anyhow, there was a falling out between him and Capcom, and I believe he was trying to take the rights back for Mega Man. So, but I believe there was some kind of dispute where he could not reacquire the rights. It's kind of the same vein with Kojima and the Metal Gear Solid and Konami saga. Anyhow, so he created this game called Mighty Number 9 with the original Mega Man games in mind. And the game just kept getting delayed. It was getting absolutely, like, shafted in reviews. It was a shame. And eventually it came out, and when it did come out, people were like, well, this game really does suck. So,
yeah,
unfortunately...
I've only seen screenshots of it. It definitely looked like... It looked like it was on the engine of, like, Mega Man 6 or something like that. To talk about the Mega Man games a bit, because, you know, on Twitch, we have a couple streams of Mega Man games. We did 2 not too long ago, and, you know, we'll upload that to YouTube eventually.
Not too long ago?
Like last week.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, like last week. And also, as you're listening to this, we should already have a stream up of Mega Man 3's, well, a bunch of other games we played today. Yeah, basically, as the Mega Man games, the series went on, until X came out, basically, 4, 5, and 6 were... The way they designed them, one weapon works against one boss, and then every other weapon really doesn't. So there's only one way to beat the game, like one pathway, like, you know... Mega Man's 1 through 3, a couple different weapons worked on a couple different bosses. Some worked better than others. Mega Man 2 is notorious for that because the Metal Blade worked against like 4 bosses. However, you know, again, I guess they wanted to make every weapon kind of like equally as powerful. So, but you know, 3, it came to a head at 3. There's a point in 3 where Shadow Man's weapon, the Shadow Blade, works against Magnet Man, also works against, I believe, Spark Man. The Hard Knuckle also works against Spark Man, but you had Gemini Man, who's weak to the Snake weapon. You had Snake Man, who was weak to the Needle weapon, and then Needle Man was weak to the Gemini weapon. So you would always have like one of those bosses where you would not have the weapon to beat him, but you also had like a different weapon worked not as good, but fairly decent enough. Which, you know, the Mega Man designers kind of seen this flaw, and 4, 5, and 6 were basically you had one order to beat the bosses. Like once you figure out what weapons works, and then, you know, all the other weapons just kind of did minimal damage or no damage. It was, I want to say, it kind of eliminated the variety. You know, like you could, the charm of the original Mega Mans were picking your bosses in a certain order, and you might do it differently than someone else. You know, but you know that's the Mega Man series. It's basically, it wasn't desperate need of a remake. 9 and 10 were refreshing, but Mighty Number 9 was terrible.
I think a year or 2 before that, there was something called Mega Man. I believe it was some kind of Mega Man collection that had recently come out for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3.
Yeah, I have it actually. It was the first 6. It was 7. It was 8 for which was released for PlayStation, and I want to say Saturn had a copy of that, and it was an arcade game, like a arcade fighter that never made it to this country. You had to unlock that though. Mm-hmm. They were fun games. I mean, it was the GameCube version. I had the GameCube version. It was terrible because they reversed the B and A button. So anyone that was playing this on a Nintendo, you know, it was basically you had to completely readjust to the controls. It was such a pain, and the controls weren't as responsive as the NES version. But you did unlock some stuff while you're beating these games. They also did the same thing for the X series. I believe that was for PS2. I have that. I actually have a copy of that for PS2. It was the X series, X1 through 6, and then they had a couple things you can unlock while playing them, secrets and everything. But like most of the secrets, I already knew. Like 1 through 3, I've beaten. 4, I've never actually beaten, but I've gotten to the last boss. I just couldn't figure out the pattern. The good games. I mean, 5 was the weak link in that. 6 was pretty good, but like, you know, they were basically what we're talking about, like, remakes and everything. These were like arcade ports and ports like to new systems so new players could play them. They were almost exact ports except for the fact that like the controls are a little screwed up on the GameCube version. But remakes are going to keep happening. I have a feeling in 2017 we're going to see like people dig out some old Nintendo and SNES licenses and release
Adventureland.
Yeah. Oh God. You know what would not surprise me? Sadly enough, seeing a new Bonk game, even though that's kind of obscure, but. Bonk was for TurboGrafx 16. They eventually released it, I believe, for SNES after TurboGrafx went completely under.
It was the NES, actually.
NES they released it for. Yeah, after TurboGrafx went completely under. NEC had the licenses, Turbo Technologies went under. It is called the PC Engine in Japan, if you're trying to research this. Yeah, they went under. These titles wound up on... Actually, I've downloaded a few for PS3, and... we'll be talking about the TurboGrafx eventually, and Turbo Duo, and all those wonderful systems. Some obscurely good games. But yeah, I can see them doing remakes of some of those, Bonk included. Splatterhouse, I believe, didn't they actually attempt one?
They did remake Splatterhouse for the Xbox 360 and the PS3.
Oh man, yes.
I think it sold fairly well.
Yeah, Splatterhouse is a classic. I don't know anyone that would know the original, though, unless you can unlock it in the game somewhere.
Didn't it have to be like an unlicensed game for the NES, or was only released in Australia or something?
What, Splatterhouse? Yeah. No, it wasn't for NES.
I'm thinking of Chiller, actually.
Yeah, the Splatterhouse games were ported over to Genesis eventually, legally.
Another series that comes to mind also when we're talking about like reboots or basically reboots was Thief, which was originally a PC game that came out. I believe in the year 2000 or so, around that era, 2000, 2001, maybe even 1999, which was, quote, the premises for Assassin's Creed. So what happened was when the Assassin's Creed games started to get a little more popular, the creators of Thief came out and said, okay, well, let's reboot the game, let's put it on the Xbox 360, let's put it on the PS3, let's see how it sells. And unfortunately, it did tank.
That's the problem with some licenses like that. Like, you get these obscure licenses, and, people don't remember the original game. So, basically, you have to market these as a standalone title. And a lot of times, like, for every Assassin's Creed, you have Thief that doesn't sell as well. Also, I just want to add that I think, actually, Assassin's Creed's... biggest influence was Prince of Persia, if you remember that game. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think
which was definitely rebooted into the modern era, and even made into the movie.
That was another one. And don't get me started on
We're not
movies.
Talking about the movie.
We're not talking about movies. Anyway, I just want to end this podcast by plugging our Twitch, because we're getting a little more active on Twitch now. So it's twitch.tv/240p Club, all one word. We play through games every so often. We will basically post on our Facebook like a couple days before when we're about to have a live Twitch session. Of course, they stay on there for a couple weeks, and then we can eventually upload them to YouTube. We started off, actually, before we even unleashed the podcast, we did a Twitch for Legend of Zelda, which turned out pretty good. I mean, we didn't beat the first quest because we wound up getting really sleepy at the end of it, but... and then we did another Twitch session for Mega Man 2, which turned into Mega Man 2 Contra, and played Rescue Rangers. And then, we have another Twitch session up for Mega Man 3 and a couple other games. So check us out, twitch.tv/240p Club. Check us out on Facebook as well, facebook.com/240p Club. And of course, we have the website, 240pclub.com. I want to plug everything because, it's for the latest info on us, and we also update those regularly.
Of course, we also all have our own individual Twitch accounts. Nikki, I believe, is Miss_Catatonic. Joe is Metallic Joe, and I'm Lord Cuddy. I'll be linking all these later on the 240p Club Twitch page.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We also have Twitter. We also have Google Plus, all the wonderful things that most podcasts have. So check us out and all those. Sorry for self-promotion, but if you want to keep up with us or get your daily 240p Club fix without waiting a week for the podcast, check us out. All right, till next time, Metallic Joe.
Nikki.
Ray.
Bye!
Keep playing those old games.